Hello.
Hello. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. This is Barbara, and this is our Young Learner and Teen. Hello, BrELT. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm here with Priscilla and Cainã, our Young Learner and Teen. Hello, BrELT. Good evening, good morning.
I'm sorry. So hello everyone, I'm Priscilla, and today Cainã is going to talk about evolving hand in heart to foster global citizenship in primary school pupils. So, as wealth inequality is characteristic of every contemporary society and children develop attitudes before gaining knowledge, we need to expose pupils to multiple perspectives of real life problems and challenge misconceptions. So join the webinar and learn about instilling global citizenship education in primary schools.
All right, talking a little bit about Cainã. He holds a degree in Letras, a postgraduate certificate in EFL, a TESOL Dip, the CELTA, and an M.Ed TESOL. He has worked in various school settings and contexts such as private schools, language institutes, and NGOs in Brazil, Turkey, and Peru. Cainã, thank you very much for being with us today, and off to you.
Cainã?
Typical.
I can't hear you. Yes.
We can't hear you. Now we can hear you. Yes.
So, hello everyone.
Yes. Now I can.
Typical.
I can't hear you. Yes.
We can't hear you. Now we can hear you. Yes.
So I'd like to start by thanking BrELT for this amazing opportunity.
I can't hear you. Yes.
We can't hear you.
And also thank everyone who has joined me tonight. It is with great pleasure that I'll be talking to you about something that I'm passionate about, something that I believe in, which is global city-centric education, and I really hope you enjoy it. About something that I'm also passionate about. Let me share my screen with you. All right, so the title of my presentation today is Evolving Head and Heart to Foster Global Citizenship in Primary School Pupils. Today we'll be exploring the concept of global citizenship. The title of my presentation today is Evolving Head and Heart to Foster Global Citizenship in Primary School Pupils. About global learning. Today we'll be exploring the title of my presentation Evolving Head and Heart Global Citizenship with Young Learners and Teens. And the last part will be a short Q&A session.
I know.
Yes?
Just to interrupt you for a little second, I think that your sound in your computer, perhaps you have the video and our talk at the same time. Then the recording is looping, the audio is looping, and we can't hear you clearly. So I suggest turn off the sound from the YouTube video and just keep with the webinar. Then you won't be listening to any of us, but that's okay. The sound does keep looping. I suggest.
Okay, hold on. Can you hear me well now?
Yes, perfect, loud and clear.
I'm really sorry about this. I didn't know how the YouTube open on a separate browser. Sorry.
Just perfect now. Thank you.
Okay, so just to recap, today we'll be exploring global citizenship. I'll present a piece of research that I conducted about global learning. We'll also contribute some ideas on how to instill global citizenship in young learners and teens. And the last part will be a Q&A session. So let's get the ball rolling and explore what global citizenship is. You have probably heard of different educations. There is peace education, human rights education, international understanding education, etc. And each of these terms has a core education philosophy. They all have very specific goals and purposes for education. And also, very often, they were created according to the needs of a specific period in history, for example, and especially post-war periods. And global citizenship education, or GCE, is more of an umbrella term that encompasses a plethora of educations. So it is fair to say that GCE inherited components of previous educations to address more contemporary needs. And to understand GCE, we need to discuss the concept of citizenship itself. And a contemporary definition of citizenship goes beyond a person's rights and responsibilities towards their country of birth, towards the place where they were born. Responsibilities such as voting and paying taxes. Nowadays, citizenship involves active participation, not only in local, but also national and global communities. It also concerns the inequality that causes certain groups of people to be excluded from social, political, and economic activities. And it's basically about identifying with a community, belonging to a community, and understanding that some people cannot be part of some communities because the world isn't fair. The concept of citizenship, like I said, has evolved. It went from being equivalent to nationality to incorporate political, social, cultural, and identity-related dimensions. And these days, citizenship is central to human development, and also there is a responsibility towards the future generations to come. So it is really important to make this connection between education, the purposes for education, and the development of citizenship. There's one more term that we need to clarify, which is the global citizen. Who is this global citizen we're talking about? And more importantly, who is this global citizen that curricula across the world press us teachers to help students become? And according to the Oxfam, a global citizen is someone who is aware of the wider world and has the sense of their own role as a world citizen, respects and values diversity, has an understanding of how the world works, is outraged by social injustice. And I'd like to place emphasis on the word outraged, because this person is not only aware that social injustice exists, but there is a feeling towards it. This person needs to be eager to change that. A global citizen is also someone who participates in the community at a range of levels, such as local, national, and global. Someone who is willing to act to make the world more equitable and sustainable, and a person who takes responsibility for their actions. And therefore, the ultimate goal for global citizenship education should be to empower individuals to reflect critically on the legacies and processes of their cultures, to imagine different futures, and to take responsibility. That is a definition by Andreotti. And from this perspective, if GCE does not play its part in education, the young generation will only reproduce the old power relations that have existed forever. And they will just keep the status quo. That's why the concept of global citizenship applied to education involves the development of three conceptual dimensions. We have the cognitive dimension, which is to get knowledgeable and critically think about local and global issues, and also the interconnectedness between different global issues. There's a socio-emotional dimension that refers to belonging to a common humanity, and a behavioral dimension that is to take actions that promote peace and sustainability. You're probably familiar with the motto, think globally, act locally. I think you have heard that many times. Well, that motto kind of permeates the three dimensions because a global citizen has this responsibility towards locally, but also towards communities globally. Well, one of the reasons why I decided to pursue a master's degree was to learn more about global citizenship education. And I went to the University of Leeds because they offer a module on global learning, which focuses on theoretical understanding and practical skills of the learning and teaching of GCE. And the final essay for this module involved a small-scale research project at a primary school in Leeds. And this is what I'm going to share with you now. When in the very beginning of the module, the professor introduced the project, and he said that these were the goals of the study. So we had to elicit pupils' existing perspectives of a global issue. We had to analyze whether there's any perceptual change after an intervention program. And I'll be talking to you about what this intervention stands for. And we also had to evaluate children's understanding of the topic in light of their development stage. And I could choose any global issue. And I went for wealth inequality. Now you might be wondering, why would I choose wealth inequality? Well, for one thing, this is a topic that I find very interesting and I feel comfortable to discuss. But it doesn't have to be interesting just for me. Somehow it has to be relevant and appealing to students too. And because I assumed there would be lots of misconceptions about wealth inequality, and it would be thought-provoking to discuss it with students, I decided to go for it. But that was my my initial decision. When I learned about the school I had been assigned, and I studied about the area, the school, the students, and I realized that wealth inequality was actually something that those students might have not studied, but they most certainly would know what it's like because wealth inequality is part of their lives. The school where I conducted this research is called Holy Rosary in St. Anne's Primary. It is located in a neighborhood called Chapel Allerton, which concentrates the biggest Afro-Caribbean community in Leeds. And if it is big in Leeds, it's probably the biggest in the whole Yorkshire area. I conducted this piece of research with 30 Year 5 students, their ages ranging from 9 to 10. And 90% of them are from Black and minority ethnic or Caribbean. And most of their families receive state benefits. This is a really important fact. And of course, in the process of deciding on the topic, I also explored the literature about global issues and young learners. And I found out that in order for children to become responsible and competent adults in society, they need to develop awareness of social inequalities. And this might empower them to fight for a world that is more fair and equal. When I was reading the literature, this is a quote that really motivated me to choose wealth inequality, although at first I thought it was going to be very challenging to discuss it with students. Okay, so I had chosen the global issue. I learned about students, the area, and the school. But what was my objective with that research? First, to better understand people's ideas of wealth inequality. Second, to use Brazil as a case study to challenge their ideas and expand their cultural repertoire. And also assess the impact of this case study to finally evaluate how these 9 and 10-year-olds could discuss wealth inequality. And this is how the research process went. I made 3 visits to the school. The first one to conduct a baseline assessment, to gather information of where people's knowledge, ideas, and perceptions stood. The next visit, I spent a whole day at the school for the intervention to provide pupils with information and opportunities to revisit their ideas and their existing knowledge, to broaden their perspectives, to raise awareness, and think critically. And this was a lesson I planned for them with different activities. This is the activity program I'll keep referring to. 1 week after the intervention, I went back to the school for the impact assessment, and I evaluated the outcomes of the intervention. Okay, the baseline. The baseline assessment was actually my second visit to the school. Before that, there was a preliminary visit, but just to get to know students and the school teacher. So the first day of activities was actually the baseline assessment. And this was the first activity I did with students. I gave each one of them 2 petals, one for fair and one for unfair. And I introduced Robert and Shelley and said I wanted them to be very honest about the information I was going to share about these 2 children. Then I would read some sentences and ask students to react by raising the petals, fair or unfair. So for example, I said, Robert goes to school for boys, and there are boys and girls where Shelley studies. Fair or unfair? And then they would raise their petals. Behind it, this kind of game, I was portraying 2 different kids. Robert is a middle-class boy, and he's an only child. Shelley, however, portrays a lower-class girl who doesn't have the same privileges as Robert. But of course, I didn't tell students about this. They kind of figured it out. And the sentences were very simple, but they portrayed different lifestyles and privileges that Robert and Shelley didn't have in common. And some questions addressed wealth inequality and buying power using elements of children's daily life. So for example, Nando's is a very popular chicken place in England. And students in my first visit, in the preliminary visit, they asked me if I had been to Nando's because they love it. So I decided to use this to elicit their thoughts on wealth inequality as well. And I asked, I said, Robert has lunch at Nando's once a week. Shelley never eats out. Fair or unfair? And it turned out that 23 out of 30 students said it's unfair. The result was almost unanimous when I asked about state benefits more directly. Of course, I was not calling it state benefits at that point. But the point is that only 1 student said it was unfair that Robert doesn't get state benefits because his parents make good money. There seemed to be, they all seem to agree, but that kind of changed when during the intervention day, and I'll tell you about this later. Okay, in activity 2, I asked students to put down on a piece of paper whatever represented rich and poor for them. And the answers were very similar. Most students relate money, cars, big houses to being rich. When it came to poor, of course they mentioned people who don't have money, don't have cars or big houses, but surprisingly, some students also expressed the idea of not having friends, family, and hope, even hope. And this was very interesting. In activity 3, I asked students to color 5 countries they believe are rich and 5 countries they believe are poor. And here is where most misconceptions surfaced, because lots of stereotypes came up. As you can see on the graph, Africa and Asia concentrate the poorer countries. Only 1 country in Africa was colored as rich, They also expressed exactly the opposite idea about North America. Although Mexico was colored poor twice, the US was colored rich by almost everyone. And in Oceania, no countries were colored poor. And something interesting was that some students asked me how they should color a country that is both rich and poor. I didn't give them this instruction on purpose. I wanted them to come to this conclusion to figure this out. And then I said they could use both colors to color the same country. And the graph shows that the number of countries colored as both was very small. And South America had the most representations of countries that are poor and rich. When I compiled the data of this activity, I saw a learning opportunity there. Most students had stereotypical ideas about some parts of the world, and for them, most countries are entirely rich or poor. And this shows, for example, their limited knowledge of wealth inequality globally, but also within countries. The next two activities were brainstorming. I asked them why there are rich and poor people in the world, and the most recurrent answer was war, followed by blank answers, showing once again a learning opportunity. And in addition to that, immigration came in third place. And this is very significant when we consider the current Brexit situation and some people's attitudes towards immigrants in the UK in general. And the controversy here, though, is that a great majority of the students' families are immigrants. So when I was walking around asking questions as the students were completing the questionnaire, I asked a Polish boy why he thought immigration was causing wealth inequality when his family immigrated to the UK. And he said it was okay for his family to move to the UK because they are Polish, but it was not okay for the boy who was just sitting across from him because that boy was from Jamaica. And when things like this happen, it's important to remember that young learners and teens sometimes just passively reproduce what they hear from parents or people close to them. But that is a great misconception to be challenged. And all in all, this activity showed that people didn't know much about what causes inequality, and there seemed to be a reproduction of what they hear about immigration and its consequences. I also asked if they had suggestions to alleviate the differences between rich and poor people, and again, I got lots of blank answers, suggesting that, once again, they have limited knowledge of the issue, or they don't know ways to reduce wealth inequality. And something interesting is that charity work came up as a solution. And this is to do with the principles of the school, because Holy Rosary is a Catholic school, and they do lots of projects and charity work themselves. So in conclusion, the baseline activities indicated potential learning gaps and misconceptions to be explored. The next step was to plan a lesson for the intervention, but a lesson with activities that would best challenge the ideas that students expressed, and also make them think critically and more broadly about wealth inequality. Considering all data I collected in the baseline assessment, these were my goals with the intervention day. It is important to mention that despite their knowledge gaps, the intervention plan was not intended to simply transmit knowledge. I came up with an activity program to serve as an opportunity to help students develop critical thinking skills and to discuss and make meaning in a welcoming and respectful environment. And to do so, active learning methods underpinned my planning and the designing of the activities. Okay, this was the first activity of the intervention day. It was a KWL chart. I think you're familiar with it, or probably have used it with your students. And they had to complete this chart thinking of Brazil. And I asked them to complete just the two first columns. And not surprisingly, students' previous knowledge of Brazil was very stereotypical and based on what the mainstream media conveys, like soccer, the weather, the hot weather, and the Amazon forest. Soccer and famous soccer players were the most frequent answers, actually. Since students demonstrated limited awareness of wealth inequality within countries, I decided to use a case study about Brazil as an example of how diverse and unequal the same country can be. And in order for them to grapple with the concept of wealth inequality, I first explained some indicators that are connected with wealth concentration. So we explored the meanings of GDP per capita, infant mortality, life expectancy, and literacy rates. And I presented the numbers for England first, for them to have an idea of how the England numbers. Then I asked students to work in groups and assigned each group one Brazilian state. They received worksheets like the ones you see on the slide, and this activity followed a think, pair, and share model, which ended with a whole class discussion about what they read about Brazil, the comparisons they made with England's rates, and the inferences that they could make. And local and international comparisons really surprised students about the south of Brazil having equal or even better statistics than the UK. And I think this helped me to challenge their views from the baseline assessment. And after each group's kind of mini presentation about the state that they read about, to share the findings, I asked the whole class, what does this tell us about Brazil? And then it was clear to students that Brazil is a country with different levels of inequality. I showed students this picture of São Paulo and asked them what they saw and what they thought the picture portrayed. Students were puzzled and they asked many questions. They didn't understand the divide between the shantytown and the super fancy building with private swimming pools. They asked if there was a great wall separating the two sides because they didn't think these two realities could coexist side by side. I then elicited their ideas of why Brazil is so unequal and explained that to understand the web of inequalities in Brazil, we would have to look back at some historical events. One of the causes of inequality in Brazil that I wanted to explore was slavery. So I prepared a video lesson about 3 different favelas in Rio de Janeiro for students to grasp the links between the end of slavery in Brazil and the rise of the favelas. And students were shocked to learn that Brazil imported 11 times more slaves than the US. And not only that, Rio alone had more slaves than the whole American South. But students struggled to see the connection between this fact and the rise of the favelas. We also had very limited time to explore this. The intervention day lasted for 4 hours, 4.5 probably. And I had lots of activities planned, so we couldn't really go in too much depth about it. But the two sides of how favelas are organized called students' attention because the videos showed different sides of the favelas. And some students commented on how resourceful people from the favelas are because they build cities within the city. But most students were really intrigued by the disputes of power and the red command, or Comando Vermelho, that the video also talked about. The videos briefly talked about the pacification process and why it gets tricky in Brazil. And it was difficult for students to understand why some police forces are corrupt. They would tell me, but they are the police. It's their job to defend people, to protect people. Why don't they do that? Why don't they do their jobs? So they really struggled with that. But they were really interested in learning more about crime and violence. And as I was running out of time, I couldn't explore some other causes of wealth inequality that I had prepared. I had planned to talk about the cycles of immigration and also the cycle of gold, the cycle of rubber, the cycle of, the democracy as well. But I didn't have time to explore that. So we had to move on to initiatives to alleviate the problem. Bolsa Familia has, and I was very interested in exploring pupils' perspectives of it, especially because most of their families receive state benefits. So I showed them a BBC video about Bolsa Familia, and then I asked students to think of what a program is, how it works, and why it would or would not help reduce inequality. We followed a think, pair, and share model, and the group discussion was just amazing. It was fantastic. The students in favor of Bolsa Familia used arguments based on social justice and equity. And one student said, if some people start in advantage, they shouldn't get money because it will keep the difference. Remember, they are 9 and 10-year-olds. The students against Bolsa Familia relied on equality, and they claimed that we're all equal, everyone should receive some kind of family allowance. If the government is giving out money, everybody should get it. And this corroborates Dickinson's argument that most adolescents seem to understand social inequality from a meritocracy point of view, instead of a consequence of political and economic systems. There was a real divide of opinion in the class, but the discussion ran smoothly, and students were very respectful to each other. They took turns and listened to different point of views. I was really, really happy with how it went. However, I understand that it probably went that way because those students participate in debate clubs, and they are very used to handling discussions and different opinions. However, it's not only that. At some point, I realized that the debate turned into a competition. So students were not willing to express any change in their ideas. It was like they took a side in the beginning and they defended it until the end. Although some would kind of show that they were willing to change their ideas or their opinion, but they were not willing to express that or to let the other students notice. Okay, 1 week after the intervention program, I went back to the school and conducted some activities to assess the impact of the activity program. So what I did was to repeat some activities, compile the data, and see if there was any change in perception. We did a map coloring activity again, and this table shows how Brazil was colored before and after the activity program. As you can see, not only was Brazil colored more times, but it was mainly colored as both in the impact assessment, suggesting a shift in students' perspective of Brazil's wealth landscape. These graphs show the total countries colored before and after the activity program. The countries are divided by continents, and there's a marginal decrease in poor colored countries, which are represented by the bars in blue. So if you have a look and compare the blue bars, they're very different. And there was an increase of countries colored as both, represented by the red bars. So you see more red bars in on the second graph, which is very positive. The completion of the KWL chart showed that children retained a range of factual information. When they completed the third column, they wrote lots of factual information about favelas, violence, and inequality. And even though this activity didn't measure their qualitative knowledge, I think it's fair to say that there is some progress in comparison with the stereotypical ideas that they wrote in the first column, such as the Amazon, the soccer players, and the hot weather. My second goal with the impact assessment, with the intervention program, was to explore causes of inequality. But since I only had time to explore slavery, I decided not to measure the specific achievements of my second goal. However, one student stated in the KWL chart that they had learned something about the causes of favelas. And 4 out of 30 students wrote that they did not understand the connection between slavery and the creation of the favelas. So it would have been good to have more time to explore the causes and how they connect to how Brazil is now. But also, when I talked to my professor about this, he said that students' difficulty to see the connection could be related to students' lack of background knowledge of colonialism. Because my professor said that colonialism is a topic that is often avoided in the UK curriculum. As we focused mainly on Bolsa Familia as an initiative to alleviate the problem of wealth inequality, I also decided to have students answer a questionnaire about it. And when I asked what Bolsa Familia is, 1 week after the intervention, 73% of students gave a reasonably good answer, such as, it's a family allowance from Brazil. The government gives money to families that are poor and unhealthy. Of course, this is a very simple view of the program, but again, we're talking about 9 and 10-year-olds discussing wealth inequality. And I think that answers like this are super positive. On the other hand, 27% of students didn't know how to explain Bolsa Familia, and they said a family allowance company, or even it's a TV show. And although the numbers informing students' opinion about Bolsa Familia and the reduction of inequalities might suggest students struggled to grapple with the program goals, with Bolsa Familia goals. The qualitative answers from the questionnaire show that students who think Bolsa Familia reduces inequality had solid arguments. For example, Bolsa Familia gives a fair opportunity between different families and support them through hard times. Whereas the students who said the program actually increases inequality seemed very confused in their writing. One of them said it increases inequality because only the rich get it. And this is not what the program is. So there was some confusion there. I also wanted to know whether Bolsa Familia could have a good impact on the UK if, for some reason, the UK decided to implement it. And this is what some of them replied. So people barely get any money, so Bolsa Familia would help. Yes, because we could get families off the streets. I think this also has to do with the pastoral work they do at the Catholic school. And yes, because it gets children to learn. This relates to the fact that the receivers of Bolsa Familia, the children have to go to school. So probably the student, this is a piece of information that a student retained. I also asked whether the UK could learn anything from Brazil. And the answers were mainly about caring for people and sharing equally. This was probably the main message they got about Brazil. In conclusion, the map coloring activity showed a significant increase in the number of times Brazil was colored as both. And Pupils' existing knowledge of Brazil was very stereotypical in the beginning, but the impact assessment showed progress in understanding the country's wealth landscape. However, some of their ingrained conceptions of wealth inequality globally remained because countries in Africa were the ones that were mostly colored poor, as I show you on those graphs with the blue, green, and red bars. And students completed the third column of the KWL chart with lots of information about the favelas. They seem to have retained different factual information that was showed in the videos. And this curiosity for violence, I think, could be further explored. Perhaps they like playing violent games, and some of these video games sometimes reinforce stereotypes about Brazil. And also, I think their curiosity might have emerged from students being witnesses or victims of violence themselves. So that's something that I would like to understand better, why they were so interested about violence. The number of blanks in the impact assessment questionnaire does not make justice to students' participation in the intervention. I got lots of blank answers, but this does not reflect how the discussions in the intervention plan happened. They were much more confident speaking their minds than putting thoughts into writing, which suggests and kind of signals a fear of being evaluated on their writing. Or it might also suggest a difficulty with writing about new and abstract ideas. And Dickinson explains that he claims that children's ability to express themselves relates to their development stage. So it might have been too difficult for the students to word their thoughts. And in retrospect, I should have used different methods of data collection. So this is something, this is a takeaway from this experience for me. All right, so that was the research that I conducted and I wanted to share with you. Now, if you are willing to instill global citizenship in your students, here are some tips to help you. First of all, you must be global citizens yourselves. This means you have to go through the same process as students. So seek information, stay curious, challenge your own beliefs and ideas. And this attitude is connected to Gayatri Spivak's unlearning process. Spivak says that real learning only happens when years and years of mental habit are undone. So we really need to demystify some of our own misconceptions if you want to become global educators. Second, get to know your students. Choose a global issue that is going to be relatable and meaningful to them. And it's interesting, and I advise you to do so. I advise you to conduct a baseline assessment to understand students' ideas of activity or with the same global issue. You can choose the focus of the activities you're planning. Third, write a classroom contract, because these discussions can get heated, and it's important that students feel comfortable to share their ideas and not be judged. Fourth, plan ahead and allow time, because global citizenship education is not a one-off lesson or a one-off project. It needs to be a continuous process of development, like lifelong learning. Number 5, only address a topic that you have knowledge about and that you're interested in. This is really important. Number 6, when preparing the lesson and the activities, think of the role you want to have in each moment of the lesson. Because always remember that you are not the source of input, nor the owner of the absolute truth. Your goal should be to challenge students' ideas and support their own process of figuring things out. And the success of your lesson is not measured by how many minds it changed or the number of students who agree with your personal views. The success of your lesson is measured by the depth of criticality that your students can analyze a topic and express themselves about it. So there is an array of initiatives that you can try out in your schools. And even if you start small, maybe with one of your groups, it's important to get started. First of all, it's global citizenship and identify synergies with the teaching of English. What are the purposes of learning English these days? Language as a mere code is a dead idea. We need to broaden the concept of language learning if we want to embrace global citizenship education. Another idea is to have a global day, which is similar to a science fair, where students can choose a global issue, conduct research, present something about it, even better if it's to the whole school community. And also, guest speakers have a great positive impact on students' engagement with the topic. For instance, from my experience, I was a Brazilian talking to them about wealth inequality in Brazil, and this has an effect. It is very important that you involve people who work with or experience the global issue firsthand, especially if you teach very privileged students. They need opportunities to interact with people, opportunities to interact with ideas that are out of their privilege bubble. So one idea is to try and find NGOs and someone to speak to your students. Depending on the school, the project, and the support from the NGO, the students might even visit the NGO to learn more about a project, for example. The next 3 approaches are recommended by UNESCO. We have the school-wide approach, which is when global citizenship education is part of the school ethos, and it guides the creation of the curriculum and permeates the learning environment. So you gotta have lots of support from the school leadership. The cross-curricular approach is when teachers collaborate across all subjects, because the same topic can be addressed from different and complementing perspectives. The third approach is when you seek collaboration with a specific subject teacher instead of tackling a global issue as a transversal goal. And usually foreign language collaborate with geography and history teachers, but there are no limits to this collaboration. For example, in the UK, most of the citizenship curriculum focuses on physical education. And regardless of the journey that you decide to embark on, you must always remember that even small drops help fill a bucket. So whatever initiative you decide to try out, be sure it will make a difference. And that's a wrap. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cainã.
Thank you very, very much. Your research is very carefully done and well explained to us. Thank you a lot. Now Priscilla is going to bring the questions from YouTube. Okay?
Yeah.
All right. So again, thank you so much, Cainã. That was really interesting. And the first question is from Alejandra Labanca. And she's asking, how do we know when children are prepared to know some delicate topics or to learn some delicate topics? How do we know that? The right time for teaching them?
No global issue is easy. All global issues are delicate. They're very taboo topics and very sensitive. My advice is you have to decide on the depth that you're going to approach the global issue. But also, you have to choose, like I said, it has to be something that you feel comfortable to discuss. You need to have knowledge about it. Because, for example, when a student said, oh, it's okay for me to be an immigrant, but it's not okay for the other kid to be because he doesn't come from Europe, you gotta be prepared to handle that. So choose something that you feel confident to speak about, something that students can relate to. So it somehow they have to express interesting in that. And then decide on the depth that you think they are ready to discuss, to explore the topic. And for that, you might consider doing the baseline assessment. So you might prepare some activities to gather information about their existing knowledge, and then you make a decision. If you think, well, I don't think they're prepared, or there are too many misconceptions about this, I don't think I'll have the time, nor the school supports to approach this with the students, then just drop it into something else. And the school leadership support is really important, because these days we're very likely to be accused of indoctrination. So when you bring global issues into your classroom, just make sure that the school leadership supports you and is aware of the project you're planning to carry out with your students. And also, they might also help you figure out the depth that the students are able to explore the topic.
Yeah. Thank you for your answer. And we have more questions. Lou Badra, she or he, I still don't know if it's a she or if it's a he. What were students' role in the learning in your research? Were they more active or passive in the whole process of learning about inequality?
They were, at first, they didn't understand why I was asking those questions. They didn't figure out the topic was going to be wealth inequality at first, because we were talking about Robert and Shelley, and they were coloring the maps. But when I introduced the case study about Brazil, when we talked about GDP per capita, infant mortality, and I showed, like, this is what England has, and this is what Brazil has, and this is what other states in Brazil present, they figured out that we were talking about differences. So for some time, they didn't understand we were talking about wealth, but they understood we were talking about probably different opportunities or different rights, and this is important. And they were very participative. They were really excited. I think it's an element of motivation to have a foreigner in the classroom. So like I said, I am Brazilian, and I was talking to them about Brazil. So I think they were really motivated about it, and they welcomed me in the classroom every visit. However, again, when I gave them questionnaires to answer questions about what we had discussed, lots of blank answers. And this didn't make justice to their participation in the activities. So, and they were 9 and 10-year-olds. So really think about ways to elicit data that best suit your students' skills, and think about how comfortable they would feel like sharing their ideas. And one thing that is really important is the classroom contract that I had planned to do, but students already had a classroom contract. So we were on the same page about respect in the classroom, respect for different opinions, turn taking. They were good listeners, and when it became a competition, they worked really hard to discuss with the other students to come up with good arguments, because they wanted to prove their point. So I would say they were really, really participative throughout the research.
Nice, really interesting. we have one more question. Some people saying that you did an amazing job. And that's Mr. Rod. He said, I can see my students discussing the topic and profiting from it. Very inspiring. So that's Mr. Rod telling you that he's inspired by you.
Wow.
And one last question. Let me just find it. Oh, where is it? It's about, yeah, I found it. No, I didn't. I'm sorry, I lost the question here. But
I
it
think
was
I got it.
about
It's
the
Luciana
family.
again. Yes. Yeah,
It's about the
Luciana
family,
saying,
right?
do you agree that families should also be involved in the process in order to develop global citizenship skills in children?
Definitely. This was my research. That the research that I presented, it was the final essay for a module, but my dissertation was about teachers' motivation to integrate global citizenship education and language teaching and learn. Is that if we want English to be taught from a more critical and political perspective, we need to involve all stakeholders of education. We need to align this with parents, students, the school leadership, policymakers, curriculum writers. We need to involve everyone. It might start, if you want to start it in your school, with one group to try it out. And you can show some progress. You show that this brings positive results to and contributes to students' citizenship formation. I think you can start making a case and kind of gain support from the school leadership, from other teachers, and they might help you and collaborate in projects. But it's really important, and again, especially because we're talking about a period when Escola Sem Partido is just getting more and more supporters. We need to involve as many stakeholders of education as we can if we want to apply such a political perspective and philosophy to language teaching.
That's it. Thank you very, very much, Cainã, once again. Is there anything you want to say?
Thank you very, very much. It was really, really interesting. It links really well with what I studied. So we have been talking about it, and I really love that. It's very inspiring. And do you have any comments? Any last words you want to leave?
I do. I hope that I encourage more teachers to embrace global citizenship education. And what I'd like to tell you is that you have to rethink, revisit why you believe in education. You have to really believe that education makes a difference to change the status quo if you want to apply global citizenship education in your lessons. So my biggest advice is find your own education philosophy and how it connects with the subject that you teach, which in this group is most likely to be English, and find synergies between what you believe and what students need to learn. And I think when you find that common ground, you're going to have plenty of motivation to start applying global citizenship with your students.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. It was a pleasure.
So just one last thing. We have the certificates. The form will be open for 30 minutes. I'm gonna share my screen and see the link. Can you all see it, Barbara?
Zach, yes.
Okay, so that's bit.ly/BrELT week 2018 certificate. So it's going to be open for 30 minutes. So you go there, fill in the form, and you're going to have your certificates for this. All right.
All right, I was just copying the link to the YouTube people as well. Again, Pri, thank you very much for being with me today, my partner in crime. Cainã, it was a pleasure to listen to your research and all the work you've been carefully doing. I also want to take the opportunity to invite everyone to participate tomorrow with us in our chat. Tomorrow the chat will be about successful practices in the YLT classroom, and we will be sharing ideas with some of our expert colleagues. So I hope to see you all there. Facebook at 10 p.m. Brasilia time. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you all very much.
So, thank you, and I'll see you tomorrow in our chat.
See ya.
Bye.